The rain came down in torrents, hammering the streets like the heavy hands of a great drum. It was the kind of rain that swallowed the earth whole, turning the road to mud and washing away all the dust of the dry season. The once bustling market square had become eerily quiet, the usual voices of hawkers and buyers silenced by the rain's insistence. The trees swayed under the weight of the storm, their leaves dancing like the feet of a village elder in a traditional dance. Mary hurried through the streets, her umbrella barely keeping the rain off her back. She had finished her shift at the small local restaurant, where she spent her days washing dishes and serving customers who came and went, paying with coins that hardly seemed enough to buy a meal for herself, let alone someone else. Yet Mary had always managed, always found something in her heart to share, even if it was only a kind smile or an extra piece of yam. She had lived in the same small home for as long as she could remember, a modest one-room shack on the edge of the village, where the sound of the rain could be heard better than the voices of the neighbors. It was a home full of memories, some good, some painful, but all part of her journey. Tonight, though, as she hurried home, she felt the weight of the storm pulling at her spirit. The rain had begun to fall so heavily that it seemed to blur the path before her. With each step, the wind whipped against her face, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. The day had been long, and she was exhausted, but she couldn't help but smile at the thought of her small, warm bed awaiting her. Then something caught her eye, just ahead, beside a broken fence and barely visible through the mist of rain. She saw a figure slumped on the ground. At first, she thought it might be a discarded bag of rubbish, but as she drew closer, the shape shifted. It was a man, lying on his side, drenched and motionless. His clothes were torn, his body smeared with blood. Mary's heart skipped a beat. She stopped dead in her tracks, her umbrella falling to the ground. She ran toward him, her bare feet splashing in the mud. "Hey, are you okay?" she called, her voice cutting through the rain. She knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she touched his shoulder. The man groaned softly, his eyelids flickering. "Please," he whispered, barely audible. "Help me." Without thinking twice, Mary pulled off her scarf and pressed it against his side, trying to stop the blood. She quickly assessed him. His chest was rising and falling shallowly, but he was alive. He had a feverish, pale look to him, and his breaths were shallow. Stay with me now," she muttered, her voice firm despite the fear that began to rise in her throat. She searched her bag, pulling out the last bit of food she had saved for herself, some leftover rice, and a small container of water. "Eat, please eat," she coaxed, holding the food up to his lips. The man opened his eyes, staring at her through a haze of pain and confusion. Who are you?" he asked weakly, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm Mary," she replied gently, her hands shaking as she fed him the rice, trying to keep him steady. "I'm going to help you. You're going to be fine." The man's hand reached out, grasping hers weakly. "I don't know if I can survive this. But I have no choice," he said, tears mingling with the rain on his face. "I don't have much time. I'm not from here." Mary squeezed his hand. "You're going to be all right. Just keep calm. I'm here." She wrapped her scarf around his side, tying it as tightly as she could to slow the bleeding. With great effort, she helped him sit up, though he winced in pain. His face was grimacing, and his clothes were soaked with blood and rain. "I'll get you to safety," Mary assured him, her voice steady. "Just hold on." She carefully looked around, checking to make sure no one was watching. In this part of the village, people were always quick to assume the worst, and Mary knew that if anyone saw her with a stranger like this, questions would follow, dangerous questions. The last thing she needed was to be caught up in something she couldn't control. "Who did this to you?" she asked, looking into his eyes. The man shook his head weakly. "I don't know. I was just walking and then, I don't know. They attacked me from behind." Mary didn't ask any more questions. There wasn't time. She knew the roads were often unsafe at night, and whatever had happened to him was not something she could explain or fix on her own. But she could help him now. "Wait here," she told him softly, as she darted into a small alley nearby. She returned a few moments later with a cloth bag in her hands. "I'll get help for you. I'll call someone who can help." She pulled out her small phone, dialed the number of a local healer she knew, and whispered into the receiver, explaining the situation in a hushed voice. "I'm with a man who needs help. He's bleeding badly, and I don't know who he is. Please come quickly." As the minutes ticked by, Mary stayed close to the man, offering him what little comfort she could. When the healer finally arrived, a local woman known for her wisdom in treating wounds, Mary quickly stepped back, feeling a rush of relief wash over her. The healer worked swiftly, bandaging him up, using herbs and salves she carried in her bag. The rain slowed as the healer continued her work, and Mary stood back, watching the whole scene unfold. She couldn't help but feel a strange connection to this stranger. She had helped him when he had no one else, and now he was alive because of her. When the healer was finished, she stood up and looked at Mary. "He will survive, but he needs rest. You did well, girl." Mary nodded, smiling faintly. "Thank you, I couldn't have done it without you." As the healer left, the man, now a little more conscious, looked at Mary with a mixture of gratitude and something else, something deeper. "You saved my life," he said, his voice still weak, but full of emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." Mary shook her head, her heart a little heavy. "You don't need to thank me. It was just the right thing to do." The rain had now stopped, leaving behind a fresh, cool breeze. The streets were still quiet, but a feeling of peace had returned to the air. Mary helped the man to his feet, her arm around his waist for support. "Let's get you somewhere safe," she said. As they walked together into the night, Mary couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet understand. She had helped a stranger, but now, there was a bond between them that neither of them could have foreseen. The sky was a deep shade of gray the next morning, with the soft cooing of doves echoing faintly through the trees. The rain had washed the village clean, but it left behind puddles and a cold breeze that made even the strongest bones shiver. The earth smelled of wet clay, and smoke from cooking fires began to rise gently into the morning air. Mary blinked, her eyes open slowly. The floor beneath her was cold, the raffia mat she slept on barely offering comfort. Her body ached from the previous night's ordeal, carrying a bleeding man through the storm, treating his wounds, and staying awake by his side in case he needed her again. She sat up quickly, heart racing. The stranger. She looked to the corner of the tiny, leaking house she had hidden him in, a small, abandoned building behind the compound where no one bothered to check. The thatch roof had several holes, and the walls were stained with age and rain, but it had been safe enough for one night. The mat she had laid for him was empty. The faded wrapper she had covered him with was folded neatly. He was gone. Mary stood, her bare feet cold against the wet floor. Where did he go? She whispered to herself, searching around the room for any sign that he had at least left a note or something. But there was nothing, just the faint trace of blood on the mat, and a dried leaf from the healer's herbs. A part of her panicked. Had someone taken him? Had his enemies come back? Was he even real, or just a passing ghost of the rain? She walked outside, shielding her eyes from the pale sunlight. The compound was already alive with the usual morning madness. Chickens running wild, goats chewing at the walls, and old Mr. Baco, her stepfather, already shouting, "Mary! Mary, you this useless girl! Where is my food? Have you not seen the sun already standing on top of our heads?" His voice thundered from the main house like a market crier with a bad temper. Mary sighed deeply. The questions about the stranger would have to wait. Her stepfather's temper could burn through walls if left to boil. She rushed to the kitchen, an open cooking area built with broken cement blocks and old zinc sheets. A rusted three-stone fire pit sat in the center, blackened pots stacked beside it. She grabbed the old pot, poured in some water from the clay pot, and started boiling the leftover yam peels and beans that Baco liked. He always demanded food from her, yet never once offered her a plate. She could spend hours pounding yam, roasting corn, or preparing bitterleaf soup, and he would lick the bowls clean and leave her the bones. As she stirred the watery porridge, she thought of the man again. How he had clung to life, his weak hands clutching hers, his feverish voice calling her a savior. Why did he leave? Was he afraid? Was he being chased? Did he even know where he was going? Her thoughts were cut short when Baco's grating voice rose again. "Mary, do you want me to come and break your legs before the food reaches me today?" She clenched her jaw, scooped the food into his old enamel plate, and walked into the house. Her stepfather sat shirtless on a wooden chair, one hand scratching his belly, the other slapping a fly away from his cracked lips. His eyes, sharp and filled with suspicion, followed her every step. Better put it down before you trip, and pour it like last time, he grumbled. Mary dropped the plate gently, then turned to leave. Where are you going, in? You didn't even greet me this morning. No home training at all, he snapped. Good morning, sir, she replied stiffly. Humph, he snorted, already digging into the plate with his fingers. This food better not taste like bath water. Mary walked out, the lump in her throat growing. She had grown used to this, the insults, the hard labor, the lack of kindness. Ever since her mother died, this man, whom her mother had married during her final years, took control of everything and made life unbearable for Mary. The little house her mother had left her was almost snatched, but she fought and kept at least the broken shed behind the compound. That was the only space she could call hers. After scrubbing the cooking area, washing his clothes by hand, and fetching 2 buckets of water from the nearby stream, Mary's body screamed for rest. But rest was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her shift at the restaurant was starting soon. She changed into her brown faded gown, the only one neat enough for work, tied her scarf tightly around her head, and began the long walk down the winding path that led to the main road. She passed children running with sticks, women trading gossip at the corner shop, and the town's madman dancing to the sound of his own invisible drum. Mary, good afternoon, oh, shouted Yu Ju, a pepper seller who sat with her feet in a basin of water. Good afternoon, auntie, Mary replied with a tired smile. You day waka like say dem flog you, Yu Ju teased. What'd happen? That your stepfather again? Mary only smiled faintly and kept walking. Her legs felt like logs. Her arms ached. Her heart was still wondering where the stranger had gone. By the time she reached the restaurant, a small wooden building with a zinc roof and wooden signboard that read Mama Ifeoma's Taste of Home, she had already pushed the morning into the back of her mind. But just as she entered the kitchen door, Mama Ifeoma, round like a calabash and full of loud energy, looked at her suspiciously. Mary, come here. You're late. What happened? Mary bowed slightly, her voice low. I woke up late. I had work to do at home. Mama Ifeoma eyed her. You sure say na home you sleep? Your eyes look like person way don fight war. I'm sorry, Ma. It won't happen again. And make sure it doesn't, Mama Ifeoma replied, softening. Go and start washing plates. The big men from town came this morning. They want pepper soup and pounded yam. I know one here story. Mary nodded and entered the back kitchen, tying her wrapper tighter around her waist. As she dipped her hands into the basin of soapy water, her thoughts drifted once more. Where are you, stranger? She thought, staring out the tiny window. Why did you leave? And will I ever see you again? Little did she know, the stranger had not gone far. And he had not forgotten her. Not even for a second. The air in the office was cool and perfumed with the scent of oud and citrus. Soft jazz music played in the background, floating gently beneath the hum of the air conditioner. The walls were adorned with framed photographs, black and white shots of oil rigs, shipping yards, smiling workers, and the gleam of men in suits shaking hands. A giant mahogany desk sat at the far end of the room, polished so finely it reflected the golden light from the chandelier above. Behind it sat a man, his posture regal, yet thoughtful. He was dressed in a light blue kaftan that hugged his broad shoulders and fell gracefully down to his polished Italian loafers. A single gold chain rested on his chest, glinting softly against the fabric. His face was striking. High cheekbones, a full well-groomed beard, and eyes like smoldering charcoal, sharp and steady. This was Chikazi Nwokedi, CEO of Nwokedi Global Holdings, one of the youngest and most powerful entrepreneurs in the country. He owned shares in oil, tech, agriculture, real estate, and a popular chain of banks. The world saw him as ruthless, brilliant, untouchable. But this morning, he wasn't thinking about contracts or board meetings. He was thinking about a girl from a village whose name he hadn't even asked. He leaned back in his chair and stared out the large tinted window that overlooked the city skyline. The streets below buzzed with life, cars, pedestrians, hawkers, but his mind drifted far beyond the glass towers and honking horns. Her hands were shaking when she gave me that water, he thought. But her eyes were steady and kind. She had not asked for anything. She didn't run away in fear. She didn't try to take his wallet or ask who he was. In fact, she treated him like someone worth saving. Not because of power or wealth, but because he was simply human. He rubbed his beard slowly. That night, after she treated his wounds and sat beside him while he slept, he had woken before dawn and watched her sleeping upright, head resting against the wall, arms wrapped around herself for warmth. Her scarf had slipped a little, revealing a tired face with soft features. A woman who had seen suffering but still gave. He couldn't bear to wake her. So he had left. But he knew the moment he stepped into the car that had been secretly parked by the bush path, he would return to her. She had touched a part of him no amount of money or power had ever reached. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he said, his voice deep and calm. A slim man in a gray suit stepped in, holding a folder and wearing dark shades. His name was Jude, and he was Chickazee's personal aide, loyal, silent, and deadly efficient. "You called for me, sir?" Chickasee turned to face him. "Yes. I need something personal looked into." Jude raised a brow but said nothing. He pulled out a small notepad. "Go ahead, sir. There's a girl. A young woman. About 24, maybe younger. From a village near Nsuka. I don't know her name yet." Jude blinked. "A village girl, sir?" Chickasee nodded. "She helped me the night I went missing." Jude shifted slightly. "With respect, sir, you instructed us not to track you that night. We didn't know." "I know," Chickasee interrupted gently. "And I don't regret it. But I want to find her now. I want to know everything. Where she lives. Who she lives with. What she does for work. I want to know what makes her smile, and what makes her cry." Jude hesitated then nodded. "Yes, sir." Discreetly, Chickasee added, his voice firm. "I don't want to frighten her. I just want to understand her world before I step into it." Jude scribbled down the instructions then closed the notepad. "Her house is behind a main compound, close to a small path. There's an old broken hut there. That's where she kept me that night. She works at a local restaurant in the village. It's not hard to find. The owner is called Mama Ifioma." Jude nodded again. "I'll leave tonight. Expect a report within the week." As he turned to leave, Chickasee called out, "Jude?" "Yes, sir?" "If she's in danger. From anyone. Especially family. I want to know. I want to make sure she's safe. And if she needs anything at all, I want it provided for her quietly." Jude's expression changed slightly. "Understood." The door closed behind him, leaving Chickasee alone once more. He leaned forward and opened the drawer of his desk. There, resting inside, was a bloodstained scarf, hers. She had used it to wrap his wound that night. He lifted it slowly and held it to his nose. It smelled faintly of herbs and wood smoke. "She saved my life," he whispered. "Now it'll change hers forever." And with that he stood, stepped away from his empire for a moment, and allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in years, longing. Not for wealth, not for power, but for the girl with the tired eyes and the golden heart. The sun beat down fiercely on the small village of Umuafor. Dust swirled lazily in the air as children chased after goats and women shouted at lazy husbands from under raffia roofs. But within the cracked walls of a little mud house at the very edge of the village, dark thoughts were brewing, thoughts soaked in envy and wickedness. Silas, Mary's stepfather, sat in the corner of the sitting room, chewing a stick of cola and spitting carelessly into a cracked bowl. His eyes, yellowed with too much palm wine and evil, were fixed on the tiny wooden chest beneath the bench, the one Mary kept hidden and always locked. It had once belonged to her late mother, Ezen. "Stubborn goat," he muttered. "Your mother was foolish, leaving you with that box, eh? Who are you to hold on to something your elders cannot touch?" He spat again and stood up slowly, his bare chest glistening with sweat, and his wrapper hanging loosely around his waist. That morning, Mary had refused to give him money. Again. "I don't have anything to give, Papa Silas," she had said, gently but firmly. "Let me manage what Mama left. I use it for food, and the rest is kept for her burial anniversary." Silas had only smiled that morning, but inside, a storm had begun to gather. He was done pretending. If Mary would not hand over her small inheritance, then she would have to leave this world, just as her mother did. That night, Mary returned late from the restaurant. Her legs were heavy, her back sore, and her eyes red from cooking and smoke, and listening to gossiping women fight over men that barely bathed. She pushed open the rickety door of her room and slumped onto her straw mat. God, she whispered, let me just rest. Please, just rest tonight. But outside, in the darkness near the banana trees, two men lurked. Now this time we move, one whispered, adjusting the torn singlet he wore. Silas say make we teach her lesson. Make she no form stubborn again. The other chuckled, brandishing a small dagger. Just make sure she no scream too loud. Where we go meet? Back of the compound. Near the pit latrine. That side dark well. But just as they moved, a low hum cut through the night. A car engine. Not just any. A black-tinted SUV, quiet but powerful. It stopped some meters from the house. The two men froze, eyes wide. The door opened and a man stepped out in all black, his face calm but deadly. Jude. Before they could even turn to run, two other men emerged from the shadows, grabbed the would-be attackers, and pressed cold metal against their necks. Who sent you? Jude asked, his voice calm and cold like the wind that blows before a storm. They trembled. Silas. It was Silas Oga. He say make we just scare her small. Take them, Jude ordered. Let's teach them how pain feels. Within seconds, the men were dragged into the darkness. No one would hear from them again. Mary, still inside, had no idea what she had just escaped. She slept deeply, her chest rising and falling in peace. The next morning, Silas sat outside waiting. When he didn't see the two men return, he grew nervous. By evening, a letter was slid under his door. It read, next time you send men to touch her, we will send you back in pieces. Final warning. There was no name, no signature, just that. Silas read it again, sweat dripping from his nose. Who is watching her? He whispered. But he wasn't finished. A week later he tried again, this time poisoning her food. He laced the palm oil with powdered yam starch mixed with a little powdered battery cell. Deadly enough to kill a rat in minutes. He left the food in the pot and called her, pretending to be kind. Mary, come eat now, my daughter. You work too hard. She almost reached for it. But a strange breeze blew through the room and knocked over the pot. It shattered, splashing the poisoned soup across the dusty floor. Silas watched, mouth open, as she stared in confusion. I think the wind is warning me, she whispered to herself. God, are you protecting me? Then came the final plot. Silas approached a well-known native doctor in the next village. He brought a goat cola and some cash. She day block my shine, he told the old man. Everywhere I turn, it's her face. Help me chase her away. The native doctor listened, then lit his pipe. You say you want to get rid of her? Yes. Make she disappear. Not only then I go rest. The native doctor stared long into the flames before laughing. You're a fool, he said suddenly. Do you know who's protecting that girl? There's power around her. Stronger than any charm. Whoever she helped. That person be spirit or king. I know no. But he has covered her with fire. Silas staggered back. She's untouchable now, the old man added, blowing smoke into the sky. Pray she never turns and looks at you, because her helper go surely find you. Silas left the shrine that night shaking like a leaf. Back in the city, Jude gave his report. She lives with a drunk, wicked stepfather. The man has tried to hurt her 3 times in the past month. She doesn't know we've stopped each one. But if you ask me, sir, it's time we bring her out of that place. Chickasee stood by the window again, scarf in hand. He nodded slowly. Begin the preparations. I want to meet her. In my own way. And if the man tries again? Jude asked. Chickasee's eyes turned cold. Then make sure he never walks in the sun again. The morning began with strange silence. Even the birds refused to chirp near Mary's compound. The dusty ground was still damp from the early morning dew, but the weight of something heavy hung in the air. Something unseen, yet felt deeply. Mary sat quietly on a short wooden stool beside the fireplace, her eyes heavy with sleep and sorrow. The air smelled of burnt firewood and old injustice. She stirred the pot slowly, boiling yam for Silas as usual. She hadn't spoken to him in days, not since he tried to pretend kindness with poisoned soup. But this morning there was something different about his movements, swift, sharp, secretive. Mary! He barked suddenly, stepping out from the shadows in his brown wrapper and shirt that hadn't seen water in weeks. Finish that food and go inside. Your visitors are coming. She turned confused. Visitors? Who? He didn't answer. Instead, he whistled toward the gate. Two unfamiliar men entered, both wearing dark native attire and holding walking sticks, the type older men in villages leaned on. Not because they were tired, but because their wickedness had weight. Make she dress, Silas said sharply. She day go meet her husband. Mary dropped the spoon. Which husband? Papa, wedding ye day talk. You be woman now, abi? This one go take care of you well. His name is Okayaga. Wealthy. Has 7 goats, 3 wives and 1 strong breath. He say he like you. Mary's mouth went dry. He's old enough to be my grandfather. Silas shrugged. Better for you. At least him go teach you sense. No more stubborn mouth. And me, I go finally get peace. She fell to her knees. Please, Papa. Please don't do this. But Silas had made up his mind. And worse still, he had already collected the bride price in advance. A large brown envelope rested deep in his cupboard, heavy with cash. Before she could speak again, the men grabbed her arms roughly. She screamed, kicked, bit, but nobody came. The neighbors peeped through their broken windows, whispering and shaking their heads. Poor girl. The gods will fight for her, an old woman said. But who go challenge Silas? His heart is black like midnight, another whispered. They pulled Mary down the path, past the mango trees and narrow alley, where she had once played Tintin as a child. A small convoy of motorcycles and a donkey cart waited at the village's edge. The man she was being married off to stood nearby, pot-bellied, teeth brown, eyes wild. Okayaga the drunk. He cackled when he saw her. So this be my new flower? You go sleep well tonight, my dear. Mary spat in his direction. Suddenly, as the caravan started to move, a strange wind blew. Then a sound. Vroom. Out of nowhere, a sleek black convoy of jeeps, tinted, humming like wild animals, slid into view and blocked the narrow bush road. The motorcycles stopped. Goats scattered. Even the trees seemed to hush. Doors opened. 6 tall men in black suits stepped down with sunglasses, calm but ready. Then came another man, in white agbada, gold chain resting on his chest like royalty. His aura was heavy with presence. It was Jude. He walked slowly toward the cart where Mary had been forced to sit. He raised one hand. Which one of you is Okayaga? He asked. The drunk stepped forward, chest puffed. Nami. Who you be, small boy? Jude brought out a white envelope and handed it over. Okayaga opened it and gasped. Bundles of crisp new notes stared at him. He clutched the money like a monkey given ripe bananas. This is to thank you for changing your mind, Jude said simply. Change ku? Okayaga licked his lips. Ah, no problem. I know even too like the girl SEF. Her mouth too sharp. Make I day go. He walked off laughing, still counting the money. Mary turned stunned, her eyes wide. Who are you people? What do you want from me? Jude bowed slightly. We're not here to harm you. But someone has chosen you. And he does not take no easily. I don't want to be chosen by anybody. She screamed. I don't belong to anyone. I helped a man because he was dying, not because I wanted to be owned. Jude didn't respond. Instead, he gestured, and 2 men helped her down gently. Take me back home. She cried. I am not for sale. Back at her compound, Silas was already dancing with a calabash in hand. 2 men had arrived before the convoy, carrying another envelope even fatter than Okayaga's. Silas had torn it open, money raining like dry season harmattan. He turned and saw the cars arriving. Mary stepped down, fuming and wild-eyed. Papa! She shouted. Why? He grinned. My daughter, calm down. You're married now. This is how rich men marry. No ceremony, no plenty noise. Now silent wedding. Married to who? I don't even know his name. Jude finally spoke again. You married kindness. That's all you need to know for now. He will come for you soon. Silas was already counting again. Mary dropped to her knees and screamed into the earth, her fists pounding the dust. No one owns me. No one. But far away, in a city of glass buildings and blinking lights, Chikazi sat watching the footage on a tablet. He touched her face on the screen gently. She will understand soon, he said softly. Love is never force, but kindness must be repaid. The gate to the mansion opened without a sound. It was tall, black, and made of iron so thick it looked like it could hold back the sea. The compound beyond it was quiet, too quiet for such a magnificent place. Trees swayed gently in the breeze, flower beds lined the pathway, and the air smelled of lavender and old secrets. Mary stepped out of the car slowly, barefoot and unsure, her wrapper dragging slightly on the marble pavement. Her eyes scanned the surroundings, more beautiful than anything she had ever dreamed of. The house stood like a palace, its cream walls glowing under the sun, its windows tall and dressed with long white curtains. She hesitated. A guard gestured her forward. "Madam, he day wait for you inside." Mary frowned. "Who?" "You go see am." She followed the long corridor that led to the main sitting room. Everything inside was gold, glass, and silence. The chandelier overhead looked like a tree made of diamonds, and the sofas were soft like the clouds she used to imagine as a child. And there, beneath the large window, seated in a wheelchair, was a man dressed in a simple white robe, his legs covered in a warm gray blanket. His head turned slowly. It was him, the dying man from the street. Only now he looked cleaner, richer, and somehow sadder. "Mary," he said, his voice deep and familiar. "You came." She stared, mouth ajar, unable to process what she was seeing. You live here?" He smiled faintly. "Live? I survive. That's what I've been doing since the accident." She walked closer, almost tiptoeing, her heart pounding. "I don't understand. You were dying on the street. You were bloody and weak. How are you here like this?"
He looked down. "I didn't lie about being injured, Mary. But the truth is, I've been carrying pain for years. And sometimes I disappear from this world, into the streets, trying to forget I once walked proudly in rooms that now feel like prisons." She blinked back confusion. "But, you're rich?" "I am wealthy, yes. My name is Chickasee. My parents died when I was a boy. I built everything you see here with my hands and sweat. But money doesn't fill emptiness. People surrounded me only for gain. They all wanted something. Except you." Mary stepped closer, kneeling gently before him. "You said you were alone. That no one would help you. That night, you looked at me like a child looks at light. And you brought me food. Water. You tore your scarf to stop my bleeding. You even hid me from danger." She swallowed. "You didn't tell me who you were. I wanted to see if your kindness was true. And it was." He paused. "I wanted to see you again. I didn't know how to explain. So I told them to bring you. And yes, I dressed it up in wealth and plans and envelopes. But this," he touched his chest, "was not a trick." Mary stood up slowly, still looking at him. He looked thinner than she remembered. Paler. "Why the wheelchair?" she asked quietly. "I haven't walked since an accident 6 months ago. My spine was affected. The doctors say with care, therapy, and love, I might walk again. But they doubt it. I've stopped believing them. Until I saw you." Mary wiped her face. "Why me?" "Because your heart is pure. And because I want you to have the life you deserve." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with something raw and tender. "I want to send you back to school. Let you study, grow, live. You're too brilliant for that village. I'll give you a better life. But in return," Mary's heart skipped. "I want you to stay with me. Care for me. Help me heal. Not because I paid bride price. Not because anyone forced you. But because your heart tells you I'm worth it." Mary looked around the luxurious room. Then back at the man in the wheelchair. His hands trembled slightly. She thought of Silas. Of hunger. Of oily smoke and bitter yam and screams in the night. And then she thought of this, a man who didn't ask for her body, but begged for her heart. She stepped closer and knelt again beside him. "Then let me be your healing. If you give me my freedom, I will give you my care." He smiled gently. "It's a promise." She nodded. "But if I nurse you back to health, you must also promise not to own me. Not with rings, not with chains." He nodded. "Then we have a deal." And somewhere beyond the heavy glass windows, the trees swayed again, this time in approval. The sun melted into the horizon like golden honey poured across the sky. The birds sang sweetly, and a gentle breeze carried the smell of orange blossoms that bloomed along the edge of the sprawling estate. It had been almost a year since Mary stepped into that mansion with bare feet and a bruised heart. A year since her life changed forever. The once silent halls were now filled with laughter, music, and the scent of fresh flowers Mary arranged every morning. The kitchen buzzed with warmth. The garden sparkled under her touch. And Chickasee, no longer just the man in the wheelchair, had become a man reborn. Love, as it turned out, wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes, it grew in the quiet moments. Like when Mary would read to him by the fireplace, her voice soft and slow. Or when Chickasee would listen to her stories about her mother and village days with tears in his eyes. Sometimes, love came in the simple act of brushing his hair,
or him learning how to fry eggs just to surprise her. They were healing each other. Slowly, gently, every day. One evening, as the sky painted itself in strokes of red and orange, Mary stepped out to the balcony with a cup of hibiscus tea in her hand. She didn't hear the footsteps at first, but then soft, careful steps behind her. She turned. Chickasee stood unaided. No wheelchair, no walking stick, just his 2 feet, and his open arms. Her hands flew to her mouth. You're standing. I've been practicing for weeks, he said, eyes glistening. I wanted to walk to you. For you. She ran to him, the tea spilling forgotten. He caught her, and they stood arms around each other, hearts full. Later that evening, they walked hand in hand through the gardens, the path lit by small lanterns and the last golden stretch of sunlight. She wore a flowing gown of soft green. He wore a simple white kaftan, and when he stopped beneath the mango tree, the same one he used to sit under during his therapy sessions, he knelt slowly. Mary, I once asked you to stay because of what you gave me, hope, care, healing. Now I ask you not out of gratitude but out of love. Will you continue to walk with me? Not as a helper, but as my heart. Tears rolled down her cheeks. You already have my heart. I gave it to you the day you said I was free. They kissed under the soft rustle of leaves. And it wasn't the kind of kiss that made noise. It was the kind that made promises. Years passed, and they built more than a life. They built a legacy. Mary opened a school for village girls who had nothing but dreams, just like she once did. Chickasee built health centers in places where the poor had been forgotten. Together, they held hands not only in gardens, but in storms, in laughter, in celebration. And every evening, no matter where they were, they made time to walk, side by side, into the sunset. For love had found them not in palaces or riches, but on a cold, rainy street where a girl chose to be kind. And because of that kindness they lived, happily ever after. Together. Forever. Like an African sunset, beautiful, warm, and everlasting. The end.